The North American International Championships happened not too long ago, and there was a really interesting graphic that I saw come up. And this is a graph of the decks being used at the tournament. It had like 1,800 plus 1,890 competitors, making it one of, if not the biggest Pokemon TCG tournament of all time. And even with 1,890 players, 75% of players were playing the same 5 decks, with Gardevoir having 1 in 4 players were playing Gardevoir, and then the rest coming in here. And it makes you think like, oh yeah, like if I want to stand a chance at this tournament, I have to play one of these 5 decks, right? No. Congratulations to Cyrus Davis, who won the whole tournament with Inteleon Urshifu, made a really great meta call, played fantastic. This is a really hard deck to play, and it's pretty niche in the grand scheme of things. Yes, it's a top 10 deck archetype, but in limitless tournaments, this deck is played 3% of the time. And if you're playing PTCG Live, you'll hardly ever see this deck. 1, because the cards aren't free anymore, and 2, it's a really hard deck to play. And despite that, this is a very niche deck. It's not considered a top tier deck, and it just won the biggest deck, or biggest Pokemon, one of, if not the biggest Pokemon TCG international tournament in history. Again, congratulations to Cyrus. And this isn't necessarily going to be a big tournament talk, but I did want to talk about decks and top tier decks. And this is in particular for players who are maybe more like me, more casual, who mostly play PTCG Live. Maybe you play at a couple local tournaments here and there. And especially for those just starting out, I think there is a lot of pressure when you're doing your research on what decks to play, that you're like, well, everyone's playing these decks, so I have to play these decks too. And the reality is, you don't have to, and you can succeed without playing one of these decks. Look at Cyrus. We're going to go and look at some other examples as well. But yeah, this is just a conversation that is about top tier decks. And hey, you don't necessarily have to play them to have a good time or even to win. I'm Jet from inthirdperson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's talk about in particular, like why you wouldn't want to play one of these top tier archetypes, and like whatever the decks might be. Over time, this is going to change, but based on what I've seen of meta splits, over half of players in any given tournament are playing the top 5 decks. And why would you not want to? I'm not trying to say don't play top tier decks. There are obvious advantages to top tier decks, whether they're more consistent, whether they're more powerful, whether they have a great matchup spread against the other top decks. Like, the top decks are the top decks for a reason. And if you're in a position where you can play them, you like them, continue playing them. No shame in that. What I'm trying to say is, like, if there's any other reason why you wouldn't be playing these decks, for the most part, don't worry about it. And let's talk about some examples of why maybe you wouldn't or you aren't playing the top tier archetypes. Like, let's just say, for example, I think one of the biggest ones, particularly for those who are just getting into the game, or you're playing in PTCG Live, where the in-game economy is horrible, maybe you don't have the carts. Maybe you just started playing PTCG Live at this juncture. Right now, it's the Paldea Evolved format, and the Gardevoir deck isn't free anymore. So you missed out on your opportunity to get the Gardevoir cards for free, and the credits for these cards are really hard to come by. And maybe it's a little better off that you just upgrade a different deck that you have for cheaper and get it to a place where you can compete. That's totally fine. Or if you want to play a certain archetype that's really expensive to build, like for example a Lugia, where you have to pay for a bunch of Pokemon V and V stars and so on and so forth, in particular in PTCG Live, and you just don't have the credits for it, especially if you're starting from scratch, don't worry about it. You can play other decks. You can use some of the starting cards in the off the battle pass or the default decks, and you can get yourself to a point where you're doing all right, you're playing, you're having fun, and you're getting some wins here and there, and can actually compete at a decent level. Another reason why you may not want to play a top tier deck, and I'm going to use Lost Box as the example. Some decks are really hard to pilot. And yeah, I personally, if I were to say what is the best deck in the game right now, I'd probably say this. The Kyogre is absolutely insane in that it can come in at the end of the game and sweep the board, take multiple prizes, and it almost seems like it doesn't matter how far back you fall behind. Kyogre can come in and save the day. However, this deck is incredibly difficult to play. You are constantly whittling cards away, getting rid of cards permanently, and at the end of the game, you have to set up a wombo combo where you basically whittle your deck down to 0, energy recycler a bunch of cards back, put down Kyogre, move it into the active, Mirage Gate 2 energy to the Kyogre, attach a 3rd energy, and then still have 4 to 5 energy in your deck to hit the final attack. It's incredibly difficult to do, and I've played against many people who have used this deck, and sometimes I lose, and it is what it is, but more often than not, I run into people who just can't pull off the combo at the end, and it just doesn't work out. But like even before then, just piloting a deck like this can be incredibly difficult, and if you're not at a point where you can pilot something like this, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter if the pundits say this is the best deck in the game. If this is a deck you cannot handle, or whatever deck it might be, if it is above your comfort level in terms of skill, then don't worry about it. You'll probably be better off playing a not top tier deck that you are a lot more comfortable with. Another reason why to maybe not play a top tier deck is the playstyle. Lugia V-Star in the Silver Tempest era was the definitive best deck in the game, and it was one of the most busted decks of all time. And right now, it's not that deck, but it's still incredibly strong, and there's multiple ways to build it with either the single strike variant or the Snorlax Weirdier combo. And despite how strong this deck is, I hate playing it. I absolutely hate playing it. And it's largely because it's not fun to get the board set up, trying to get the Archeops in the discard pile and then using Lugia to bring them back in. It can be incredibly frustrating if the entire game hinges on you getting these 2 of these 4 cards into the discard pile and then evolving Lugia. And if for whatever reason that doesn't happen, the entire deck falls apart. And I absolutely hate that part of the deck. And regardless of how good it is, I just don't like that experience in the first 2 turns so much that I just don't play this deck unless I absolutely have to for videos and whatnot. So there are playstyle considerations here. Even if Lugia was the best deck in the game, if this is a deck that you just don't like to play, then don't worry about it being the best deck that you have to play. Find another way. Don't worry about it. And then another reason why top tier decks may be not the right pick for you. Counters, right? Mew VMAX at the top of the world, still one of the strongest decks to this day. And Drapion is here, right? And lots of decks still run, maybe not as much now where Mew is starting to slip a little bit, but Drapion is an ever-present threat. They just bench it, and then you lose 3 prizes instantly, and that's always been a problem. Almost always been a problem for Mew VMAX since this card was introduced into the game. And if you're playing a top tier deck, the likelihood of your opponent, 1, knowing how to play against you, and 2, actively having counters in your deck specifically to fight you is a lot higher. Here's another example of an Arceus box plus everything deck, and this has a bunch of counters in it. It's got the Umbreon for the gusting, and it's hitting Mew VMAX and Gardevoir for weakness. It's got the Spiritomb, which shuts off Lumineon. It shuts off Genesect. It's even got the Box of Disaster, which is specifically a tech for Gardevoir, where if one of your Pokemon V gets knocked out, you get to drop 8 damage counters on your opponent's active Pokemon, the attacking Pokemon, and therefore, Gardevoir has to take a lot of damage to get charged up. Then you use the Box of Disaster, comes in at the end and knocks out the Gardevoir's attacker in the process. And when you are playing one of these top archetypes, the likelihood of running against people that are countering you with stuff like Path to the Peak and Lost City and Box of Disaster and Umbra, it's a lot higher, and you may find that you are better off playing a deck that your opponents don't see coming, or playing the counters to the best deck, or just playing a deck that you are more comfortable with. And then last but not least, like why maybe you don't want to play a top tier archetype. You can still win without a top tier archetype. We already talked about Cyrus Davis winning NAIC with Inteleon Urshifu. Here's an example from the Orlando. Is this the one? No, this isn't the one. It was the, oh man, yeah, this is the Fresno regionals, where David, shout outs to David, who got top 8 at Fresno regionals. This is a tournament that had 903 players, and they got top 8 with Darkrai. Now, Darkrai has never been a top archetype in the game, and they still piloted it to a top 8 finish with a record of 12-3-1, and they got a little bit of plot armor in the process. I'll admit, like, they ran into 5 Mew VMAXs, which are advantageous to it. However, still getting a top 8 finish with a deck that most people would consider not meta relevant. And some other examples. United Wings, Alex Schmansky at NAIC got, I think, tied for 65th. And this is, its overall win rate on Limitless tournaments is only 42%. But when you look at its matchup spread, it does well against Gardevoir. It does well against Mew. It also does well against Lugia. And United Wings is never going to be a top archetype. But it's a deck that a number of people like playing because it's the single prize archetype. It's a rogue tier archetype. It also hits some of the best decks for weakness, which is very cool. Some other examples in NAIC, the juniors division. Shout outs to LDF for covering this deck, by the way. The first place deck was Arceus Regidrago. Regidrago is a Pokemon that I love, like the Regidrago V-Star. And this player, I unfortunately don't have their name. They won the juniors championships with their take on Arceus Regidrago, which is absolutely awesome. And one more example. One of my personal favorite stories during the Astral Radiance era, right? This is the peak of Palkia and Mew VMAX. And all the way down here, number 18, only played 1% of the time, Shadow Rider Calyrex. And at this one late night, Hazy Cats, shout outs to Hazy Cats, follow them on Twitch, by the way. They won the tournament 8-1 with Shadow Rider Calyrex. And this is a deck that has not been particularly relevant for quite some time, like since rotation in 2021, and they played it to a win here. And one of my favorite things about Hazy Cats, and you can look at their profile on PokeStats Live, they only play Shadow Rider Calyrex. Meta be damned, they are a massive fan of Shadow Rider Calyrex, and win or lose, that is the deck they like to play, and that's what they're gonna roll with, and they've had decent success with it along the way. So yeah, I'm not saying ditch the top tier decks for garbage. No, I'm also not saying that you can just throw any 60 cards together and win, but I am saying that don't put so much pressure on yourself to play the top tier archetypes, or to go out of your way to maybe overspend on the top archetypes, because you may not need it. You may be just fine playing something else, like a well-designed deck with a decent core strategy that you really like to play, and that can get you where you need to go, if not farther. So those are just some examples. Of course, when you look at all the numbers, yeah, the top decks are the top deck, and it's fine. But there are more than 5 decks you can play in the Pokemon trading card game, and there are a number of strong decks beyond the top 5 that can get you wins on PTCG Live, that can get you wins at the late night tournament, that can help you win the biggest tournaments in the world. So yeah, there we go. Just some thoughts on on decks and top tiers and rogue tiers and all that in PTCG Live. Let me know your thoughts. Are you the type of person that likes to play the top tier decks all the time? Do you like to play the rogue tier decks to have that sort of, you know, punching upwards feel, or do you just play decks that you really like? Let me know in the comments of this video. Twitch fam, stick around. We're going to continue playing, but for our YouTube friends, we got to get out of here. Thank you so much for watching. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at In Third Person. You can check out the website, or check me out on Twitch at In Third Person, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 10 a.m. like I am right now. And check out the website inthirdperson.com for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until the next one, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.